Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Kellie de Leon with Treasure Data, and we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Saul Rashidi, SVP Chief Analytics Officer at the Estee Lauder Companies. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us about some important issues and sharing your learning and experiences in your role. Let's just start off by talking a little bit about sort of how you characterize your role and the value that you bring to any organization that you're working in.
Oh, wow. That's a big question. I think I'm my own worst judger and critiquer, if you will. Every day I show up trying to bring value. And of course, I always want to do more and go faster. But yeah, I am my own worst critic. That's for darn sure. It's interesting. I think, to quote something my father said a long time ago, same sand, different shovel. In all the positions that I've held, from management consulting and then pivoting into industry, and being fortunate enough to hit the C-suite level and taking on the roles of CDO when it first came out, back in 2015. And then now with Estee Lauder, this is sort of my fourth rodeo, if you will, in industry. They all have something in common, and that is they realize that, and don't mean to be preaching to the choir. We all already know this, but data is a key enabler to unlocking a lot of the key components. It's going to give companies a competitive advantage. And I think we've all heard ad nauseum that yes, data is the new oil. If not refined, it's of no use. And so there's always this massive aspiration of let's bring on board a leader that knows the space in and out, and can help us uncover insights that's going to give us a competitive advantage, grow market share, increase the top line revenue. Sometimes it's an optimization play. And so I think when my peers and I are given the opportunity, it's when companies are ready to put data and analytics front and center as a fundamental pillar within growth. I think that's part one, and that's, I think, where a lot of our value does come from. The other side of the coin, however, is oftentimes when you join companies, you realize that the reason they're putting it front and center is because historically they just haven't invested in the space. So part of our jobs in terms of the scope, the strategy, the prioritization is the balance between putting the basics in place and creating those competitive insights. And the basic stuff is the stuff that we're trying to catch the companies on. It's things that they should have invested 5, 10, 15 years ago, and they just haven't had that focus. So it's a lot of catch-up work. It's a lot of fundamental work. It's a lot of alignment. It could be as simple and easy as, I say simple and easy, but retention policies, our stance on GDPR. It could be creating a connected data ecosystem. It could be how does our data warehouses and data marts and data lakes play together so that we can take advantage and leverage all the information that we have. But more importantly, create that connected fabric of data. So those are some of like the block and tackle stuff around data access and sharing policies and privacies and regulations and integrations and normalizations and aggregations, right? So those are the basics. And I would say a majority of our work, unfortunately, is focused in those areas, because without those in place, we can't actually scale any of our innovation. And even if we derive an insight, if that insight is needed on a continuous basis, if we develop consumer segmentation models and they're needed on a continuous basis, if we're trying to drive recommendations engine or personalization at scale and it's needed on a continuous basis, we need the fundamentals in place to do anything. Mm-hmm. And so I think part of our job is creating line of sight to the priorities in the basics and the priorities in the innovation, and making sure we're balancing the two and that there's enough and sufficient focus on both, hoping that at some point the two will converge and scale our innovation. But the timing and the sequencing is always the fun part. Everyone wants to do the fun and sexy stuff. No one wants to do the basics, but the basics, quite frankly, is absolutely needed to be able to do and scale the great innovation work that comes out of the teams. So I hope that answered the question. But our value really isn't on establishing the rocket science. It's coming up with that beautiful balance between the two. I often call it the sizzle and the steak. You need both so that the company's sufficiently looking forward.
Yeah, that's such a great perspective. And I loved the phrase that you used, I think you said customer data fabric, or connected data fabric, maybe you said. Coming from a customer data platform, customers always on my mind. But we see that same thing. That idea of needing to have that data foundation all the way across the entire organization. But I loved how you used the word fabric, because I can imagine that you find the need for it to be flexible over time, that you have to create that foundation that is connected across the organization. And as you said, kind of balance that sizzle and the steak for those connections. I'm curious just to kind of dive into that a little bit more. You're talking so much about this connective data across so many different things that you just mentioned, and that's working probably across a lot of different groups and departments and leaders, and at a large company like the one you work at, also probably regions and all of those kinds of things. I'm curious, can you share some of the elements that help you be successful as a leader in a large organization like that, trying to create that connected data fabric in so many different ways?
I mean, the reality is sometimes I have good days and sometimes I have bad days. Sometimes I'm a hero and sometimes I'm a villain. And sometimes I'm successful in getting the alignment and sometimes I'm not. I think, while everyone understands that data analytics is important and everyone realizes that there's gaps and maturity levels that we need to hit, it doesn't always align with agendas, and it doesn't always align with priorities, and it doesn't always align with where investments are made. And I always say this job definitely keeps you on your toes. My running quote is, you need a backbone and not a wishbone, because it's every single day. So in terms of how I manage and navigate, it's interesting. I made one fatal mistake very earlier on, and I swore I would never do it again. And it was really creating partnership with the businesses that you serve. And you have to be almost maniacally focused on creating those relationships. And during COVID, unfortunately, not many of us got opportunities to create those relationships. And it just codified even more of, your first 6 months, your first 9 months, your job is not to do anything except for just study, listen, and learn and take notes. And for you to identify what's core as a pain point and an opportunity across everyone. What I say, what's common, meaning it's aligned to most people. And then what are localized issues and challenges. But for the 6 months, all you're doing is listening and learning and asking a ton of questions and being apologetic for all the questions that you're asking. You're not questioning the thing itself. You're questioning because it's how you learn in the process. And then coming up with a point of view. And then you hope that people align with that point of view. The what is probably the easiest part to establish and administer. The how we do it is probably the most challenging part, because I think, as we can all relate, not every organizational structure is the same. I've had opportunities where everything was centralized in the middle and I owned end to end. That's a lot easier to deploy. Then it's a matter of essentially going to the committee, asking for the funding, providing commitments on when you're going to deliver the capabilities, what they can see at the end of the delivery and the business value you're delivering. And then it's on you end to end how to deploy and how to go to market and how to ensure adoption and utilization. And then there are other organizations where it's not as clean, it's not centralized. We talk about the hybrid model, the distributed model, the hub and spoke model. And that's where the rubber meets the roads, and that's where the relationships matter. That's where some of your EQ matters. That's where some of your SQ, your social cue matters, and your ability to just relate with folks. That's where some of that backbone kicks in. You're needing the grit, the determination, because you're not going to get folks aligned. When you get into organizational models where it's not clean, it's not centralized, that's where all the negotiations and the alignment begin. So I wouldn't say that there's one formula that works. But I think all of us CDOs, CAOs, CDAOs, whatever C-suite title or non-C-suite title you have, if you've got the responsibility of evolving the company in this space, maturing the capabilities that exist and building the capabilities that don't exist, there's no secret formula. Tap into the things that you know have worked historically, and then the rest you just got to flex on, depending on cultural norms and who's got the most influence within the company. I wish it was a clean answer. It's not.
It's never quite so cut and dry, right? Along those
It
lines,
does matter, by the way. The consistency and the strategy and what we need to do does matter. There's an old quote, I think, from Malcolm Gladwell, where it's like, you've got to repeat something 23 times before it truly sinks in on what you're trying to do. So outlining the strategy, being thoughtful and being repetitive about it does help, but everything else, unfortunately, is slightly more subjective.
Yeah, to be determined, right? Depending on the current circumstances. I wanted to just say thank you so much, Saul, for joining me today. This has been a really great conversation, digging into challenges and really opportunities that are available when companies can get data right. So thank you for taking the time. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Kelly. I do appreciate all the great questions. The conversation definitely flowed really easily. So I did appreciate working with you. And a big thank you to CDO Magazine.